Last time, we took a look-see at what happens when you kill every English monarch. This episode of Spreadsheets and Swords, we're returning to our normal format of following one character through their life's journey. Today, I wanted to see how great was Alfred the Great. We will be observing his actions, inheriting his brother's title, expanding the realm, and how well he does with the Viking menace. If you're new to this series, here's a quick recap for you. I start by selecting a specific event or scenario that occurs in Crusader Kings. Before starting the observation process, I come up with a couple of points that I want to keep track of during the simulations. Then I boot the game in observation mode and proceed to watch it multiple times, around 50 or until I feel like I have a sufficient data set. From there, I build out a couple of different graphs to show my findings and set it all up in Google Earth so that I can animate it in a distinct way. As like before, I write out 3 predictions prior to collecting the data, so here they are. Number 1, Alfred will inherit his brother's title 85% of the time. There seems to be a scripted event where Alfred's brother, Ethelred, dies around his 28th year, usually due to a hunting accident which may or may not have been orchestrated by Alfred. I chose 85% of the time because the AI can do foolish things from time to time, and I'm unsure if the event only occurs if there's a human player in charge of Alfred. Alfred will form a kingdom 40% of the time. Historically, Alfred goes on to form the fledgling kingdom of Wessex, which goes on to be the kingdom of England. However, this is a video game and we're watching an AI try to succeed at something that even a human player can't always pull off. So that's why I've given it such a low success rate. Finally, number 3, the Viking invaders will not own more than 50% of the British Isles by Alfred's death. If I've learned anything from watching Last Kingdom, it's that Alfred isn't going to let no stinking Danes take over his lands, so I believe by his death he will keep them from owning more than 37 counties in the British Isles. Before we explore these 100% organic graphs, I would humbly ask for your subscription to this channel. Plain and simple, these videos can range from 10 to 25 hours of work from start to finish. I really enjoy making them for you all, but I can't justify doing them without your support. With that out of the way, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this video. This pie chart answers our question of whether or not Alfred inherited the petty kingdom from his older brother Ethelred. Clearly the answer is a resounding yes, so much so that it looks like Alfred is eating all the naysayers. Of the 7 times he wasn't able to gain the title, a majority of them were because he died in battle before his own brother could kick the bucket. So the lesson from this graph is that don't go hunting with Alfred because you might not make it back, especially if your name is Ethelred. Our next graph displays the life expectancy of the 2 brothers over the 50 observations I did for this scenario. We have Alfred in red and Ethelred in blue. As you may have noticed, there are a lot of blue dots landing on a number past 25. Like I've stated before, Ethelred has a nasty habit of dropping dead at the age of 28, either from a hunting accident or falling in a battle to a Dane. Unlike his brother, Alfred does a great job of consistently staying alive longer. On average, Alfred survives to be 52 compared to his brother 33 years old. We will go into what killed Alfred in the next graph. The main takeaway from this graph is, again, don't go hunting with Alfred. Hopefully I've driven this point home. This pictogram shows all the way that Alfred left his mortal coil. We have all our usual suspects: old age, battle, illness, and wounds. I usually put drinking oneself to death in the illness category, but it happened so many times I needed to call it out for you all. This just goes to show you that it can be pretty stressful being the king. Next on the docket is our discussion of another graph. Here is a nice bar graph informing us how many counties were held by Norse rulers upon the death of Alfred. Originally, I wasn't going to track this stat, but without it, you can't really get a good feeling of the state of the British Isles. I wanted to also see if my theory that the Danes aren't very effective in this current game format was correct. On average, they only hold about 17 titles by Alfred's death, which is a bad look when you take into account that they start with 8 and have the potential to get to 19 after winning the wars that are already occurring at the start of the game. Even with the Northern Lords DLC, the Viking menace on the English Isles is pretty tame. After the initial conquest, they have their power dry up in 1 or 2 generations without really conquering much past the starting lands. Out of the 50 attempts, they only came close to hitting 37 provinces, a total of twice, and still they fell shy with a 35 piece both times. So what does this all mean? The Vikings are bad at their job and need more experience. Now we get to the progress report on how well Alfred did at being a petty king and then a full-blown king. The answer is If I was scoring him on the below average to excellent scale, I would definitely give him a needs improvement. He was only able to form a kingdom 11 times. Of those 11, 7 were when he formed the Kingdom of Wessex rather than the Kingdom of England, which historically is accurate but not a traditional method of forming a kingdom in CK3 because he took a decision rather than meeting the territorial needs for the Kingdom of England. Let's jump to some gameplay to better illustrate why Alfred has such a hard time forming England/Wessex. Both Jorvik and Struderjar start out at war with Northumbria. They go on to destroy them and take all their lands. Struderjar also starts at war with East Anglia, but due to being in another war, they usually focus on Northumbria or get steamrolled by the Christian kings and don't end up taking East Anglia. Which means out of the 50 observations, the map looks like this about 80% of the time when Alfred ascends to the throne. He's surrounded by Christian realms, so he can only take a piece of them at a time, and that's just too slow even for a man who lives to his 50s. If you've made it this far, congrats, we're on our last graph. This one shows how big Alfred's realm was upon his death. All the lower points are when he died young or wasn't able to inherit Wessex from his brother. This line graph demonstrates that for the most part, it was a crapshoot. The AI sometimes was very successful, but other times wouldn't make much of their time and Alfred would die. I've overlaid the death age graph to give you a little more context. As you can see, there are times when he dies young and doesn't have more than a couple of counties. But then there are times he lives to be very old and still doesn't conquer the land. Like I said before, Alfred's just okay. Maybe this is a bigger issue overall with the AI in CK3 being too tame and needing a little more agency. Either way, here's a visualization of Alfred's accomplishments. Let's wrap up this spreadsheets and swords by reviewing my predictions from the beginning. Number 1, Alfred will inherit his brother's title 85% of the time. This prediction came to pass. He inherited the title from his brother 86% of the time. Whether that was through nefarious means is up to the court system, which is run by Alfred, so probably don't hold your breath. Number 2, Alfred will form a kingdom 40% of the time. Sadly, this one fell flat on its face. He only formed a kingdom 20% of the time. I blame the Vikings for not being more of a menace. Number 3, the Viking invaders will not own more than 50% of the British Isles by Alfred's death. This one came true, but was mostly due to similar reasons why Alfred wasn't as successful. Agency. They took some land, they never truly went hog wild like they do historically. In conclusion, Alfred does a good job of inheriting the petty kingdom of Wessex, but gets bogged down by his Christian neighbors and does not form a kingdom very often. He can't even claim to be the last hope for Christendom in the British Isles because the Vikings are equally as bad at trying to be conquerors. Hopefully in future patches and content releases there is hope for both parties. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Now that this one's in the book, I would love to hear from you all and see what next scenario or character I should cover. I was thinking of tracking the Mongolian invasion or possibly doing another I killed all the rulers of X nation. Either way, please have a good rest of your day.